The first sign that something was wrong was not the lipstick on the wine glass or the late-night text with no name attached or even the way Daniel Whitaker had started locking his phone like a teenager. It was the applause. Nora Whitaker stood at the back of the ballroom in the downtown Raleigh hotel. One hand wrapped around the stem of a champagne flute she had not touched, and listened as 200 people clapped for her husband, like he was a man of integrity. Councilman Daniel Whitaker, clean-shaven and broad-shouldered in a navy suit, smiled beneath the chandelier light with the polished humility of someone who had spent 20 years practicing gratitude in mirrors. Behind him, a giant campaign banner showed his name in sharp white letters above the slogan, "For the city we deserve." He had used that voice on voters, donors, church members, even their children, when he wanted to soften bad news. Nora knew every register of it. She had once loved him for how steady it sounded. Now she heard the calculation inside it, the way each pause landed a fraction too perfectly. "Raleigh doesn't belong to people with the deepest pockets," Daniel said, palm over his heart, voice warm as oak. "It belongs to families who built their lives here." More applause. At table 12, donors nodded like parishioners. At table 6, reporters typed. Across the room, a local developer named Victor Sloan leaned back in his chair with one ankle on a knee, smiling a thin, private smile that never reached his eyes. Nora noticed him because he wasn't clapping. He looked amused, and then she saw who sat beside him. Ava Mercer, 28, campaign media consultant. Smart, glossy, self-possessed. The kind of woman who seemed born knowing where cameras were. Nora had met her twice. Ava had a disciplined face, not cold exactly, but controlled, as if every reaction passed through legal review before appearing. "Ava." She laughed at something, Victor murmured, then turned toward the stage, and for 1 second Daniel's eyes left the room and settled on her. It was not a glance. It was recognition. Intimacy. A whole conversation compressed into half a second. Nora felt the room tilt. Not dramatically, not enough to make her stumble, just enough to make everything around her look staged. The chandeliers were too bright. The steaks smelled too rich. The men in tailored suits and the women in jewel tones looked suddenly like extras hired to applaud while a lie took a bow. Her daughter Leela, home from Chapel Hill for the fundraiser, touched Nora's elbow. "Mom?" Leela asked quietly. 19, observant, sharper than Daniel liked. "You okay?" Nora turned and found her own smile somewhere deep in muscle memory. "Fine," she said. "Just hot in here." Lila followed her gaze to the head table. "Dad's on tonight." "He usually is." Lila's mouth tightened. She had inherited Daniel's eyes, and Nora's refusal to pretend forever. "Ethan didn't come?" Nora asked, pulling the subject away before her daughter could look too closely. "Said he had midterms," Lila said. "Or a girl. Probably a girl." Ethan, 23, their son, was in Charlotte supposedly building a real estate career from the ground up, though Daniel's friends made sure the ground was unusually soft wherever he stepped. Nora nodded, but her attention kept dragging back to the table near the stage, where Ava leaned in to speak to Victor, and Victor said something that made her stop smiling. Not in fear, in annoyance. Then she looked past him again, toward Daniel, and Daniel shifted almost imperceptibly, his cuff brushing the microphone stand. Nora had spent 25 years learning his tells. That tiny movement meant tension. Not moral tension, operational tension. He was managing something. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced as Daniel stepped down from the podium, "we're opening the floor for major pledges." Music rose. Servers moved like synchronized swimmers between tables. The ballroom filled with the soft, predatory noise of money being discussed. Nora set her untouched glass on a passing tray and moved before she quite decided to. She crossed the room with the calm gait of a politician's wife, shoulders back, expression smooth. A woman heading toward allies. Inside, thoughts struck and scattered. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe it's just politics. But that was the trouble with long marriages built around public life. By the time the obvious became visible, it had usually been obvious for months. Victor saw her first and stood with elaborate courtesy. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, voice low and urbanely amused. Victor Sloan was 58, silver-haired, expensive in a way that did not advertise but never hid. He had made a fortune in commercial redevelopment, then another one correcting the damage from his first fortune. "You look stunning, Victor." Nora turned to Ava. "Good to see you again." Ava rose too. Her dress was black silk, elegant enough to vanish into wealth instead of asking for attention. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said. "Please, Nora." "Nora." Ava held her gaze, confident. Too confident? Nora couldn't tell. "You've run an incredible event tonight." "I haven't run anything in years," Nora said. Daniel prefers professionals. It landed lightly, but not lightly enough. Victor's smile sharpened. Ava did not blink. He values expertise, Ava said. As he should. I'm sure he does. For a moment, the sounds around them, silverware, laughter, the muffled thump of bass beneath the jazz band, seemed to recede. Nora became aware of the cold air rolling from the ceiling vents onto the bare skin of her shoulders. She could smell Ava's perfume, something clean with cedar underneath. It was intimate to stand that close to another woman, and wonder whether your husband knew that scent from a room you'd never seen. Then Daniel appeared, hand resting for a fraction too long on the back of Nora's chair before she sat. There you are, he said, and kissed her cheek. Campaign smile still on. Victor. Ava. Glad you've met. We've met, Nora said. Daniel glanced at her, reading tone like weather. Everything all right? Perfect, Nora said. Your speech was beautiful. Families, roots, belonging. Very moving. He gave a small laugh that would have charmed strangers. It did not charm Nora. Victor checked his watch. Speaking of roots, he said, I need to steal Daniel for a donor who suddenly discovered civic virtue after his fourth bourbon. Daniel looked from Victor to Nora, measuring. Excuse me, he said. Of course, Nora replied. Public service never sleeps. Daniel's fingers brushed her shoulder once, a warning disguised as affection. Then he went with Victor. Ava remained standing for a beat, then sat back down slowly. Nora took the seat Daniel had vacated before anyone could offer it. Up close, Ava's face showed the first signs of strain. A pulse in the throat, a faint tightness around the mouth. Good, Nora thought, then hated herself for the satisfaction. How long have you been with the campaign? Nora asked. 6 months. That's enough time to learn the script. Ava folded her hands neatly. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you are. Lila appeared at Nora's side again, sensing heat the way some people sensed rain. Mom, she said, can we talk for a second? Nora kept her eyes on Ava. In a minute, sweetheart. Ava's gaze flicked to Lila, and something passed across her face then. Not guilt exactly. Something closer to sorrow. That unsettled Nora more than arrogance would have. Mrs. Whitaker, Ava said quietly. This isn't the place. That depends what this is. Mom, Lila said, firmer now. Come on. The music swelled as the band shifted songs. Across the ballroom, Daniel shook hands beneath the campaign banner, while Victor bent into the ear of a donor. Reporters watched everything and nothing. Nora stood. You're right, she said to Ava, voice smooth enough to pass. This isn't the place. But when she turned, she did not follow Lila toward the hallway. She walked instead to the side corridor near the service entrance, where staff came and went with trays and folded tables, and where the ballroom's polished theater gave way to concrete walls, industrial carpet, and the smell of bleach. She knew Daniel would come. Men like Daniel always came when the threat was no longer abstract. He caught up before she reached the loading door. Nora. She kept walking. Nora. He grabbed her elbow. Not hard, but hard enough to stop her. She looked down at his hand until he let go. The corridor hummed with fluorescent light. Somewhere behind the swing doors, dishes crashed into plastic tubs. What are you doing? He asked, voice lower now. Campaign warmth stripped away. I was about to ask you the same thing. Don't do this here. Then where? At breakfast? In church? At the lake house your father left us, where you tell the children family matters more than anything and then disappear to take calls? His jaw shifted. You're making assumptions. Am I? She stepped closer. Then make me feel stupid, Daniel. Please. I would love that. For the first time that night, he looked tired. Not guilty. Tired. As if truth were merely inconvenient timing. It's complicated, he said. Nora laughed once, a small cracked sound that hurt her throat. That phrase should be embroidered on every expensive pillow. In every broken marriage in this country. Lower your voice. No. He glanced toward the ballroom doors, calculating exposure. Always exposure. Ava works for the campaign. There are donor relationships, development issues, city contracts, things you do not understand because you've chosen not to be involved. The sentence hit harder than if he had slapped her. Nora went still, chosen not to be involved. After years of dinners, church breakfasts, school board coffees, ribbon cuttings, funerals, and smiling through conversations with men who looked over her shoulder for more important company, after she had raised his children, hosted his allies, buried her own ambitions in tasteful dresses and strategic silence so he could become the kind of man who talked about families like a commodity class. I chose, she said softly, to hold your life together while you sold pieces of it. Daniel exhaled. This is exactly what I mean. You hear one thing and turn it into theater, and you turn betrayal into logistics. He looked away first. There it was, tiny, but final. Nora felt not surprise but the awful settling of what had already been true. How long? She asked. He did not answer. How long, Daniel? A few months. She nodded as if taking information at a board meeting. Her body felt distant, like something she had borrowed. Does she love you? She asked. Nora, I'm curious whether you even bothered to ask. It's not that simple. No, she said. It's not. Because if it were just sex, that would be ordinary. Pathetic, but ordinary. And if it were love, that would at least be human. But with you, there's always another layer, isn't there? His silence changed shape. Nora saw it then, the shadow behind the affair. Not just desire, not just vanity. What has Victor got on you? She asked. Daniel's head came up sharply. Wrong question, right target. This has nothing to do with Victor. Then why did he look like he was enjoying a private show? Daniel pressed fingers to his temple. Please, not tonight. Tonight is exactly when, she said. Because tonight you stood under a banner about families, while your mistress sat 10 feet away, beside a developer who owns half the land east of downtown, and suddenly, I don't think the sex is the story. The loading, door opened. A hotel worker hauling empty crates froze at the sight of them, muttered, sorry, and backed out. Daniel waited until the door shut again. You need to go home, he said. That's what you have? Nora whispered. That's what your whole soul comes down to? Optics? He stepped closer, voice turning urgent. Listen to me. Victor wants the old Eastgate parcels rezoned. There's a hearing next month. There are people circling this from every angle. Opponents. Reporters. My father's estate is tied up in adjacent land through the trust, and Ethan. He stopped. Nora stared at him. What about Ethan? Nothing. You said his name. Because he's involved in the development side. All right? Informally. It's not illegal. That is not the comfort you think it is. Daniel scrubbed a hand across his mouth. Victor introduced Ava to help keep messaging clean. Then it got messy. I ended it. When? A week ago. Do not insult me with calendar management. He didn't answer. She knew then he was lying about that too. What has Ethan done? She asked again. Nothing that can't be handled. By whom? You? Victor? She could feel pieces moving now, hidden gears catching. Land. Trust. Rezoning. Ethan in over his head. An affair positioned close enough to campaign money to become leverage. You brought our son into business with Victor Sloan? He needed opportunity. He needed a father, not a pipeline. Daniel's face hardened. You think you understand the world because you resent it. That's not the same as understanding it. Nora slapped him. The sound cracked through the corridor, sharp and shocking in the fluorescent hum. Daniel took half a step back, more stunned than hurt. Her palm burned. For one suspended second, neither of them moved. Then a voice came from the doorway. Councilman? It was one of the younger reporters from the local paper, phone in hand, eyes widening as she registered the tableau. Candidate, wife, side corridor, red mark rising on his cheek. Daniel turned instantly, mask snapping back into place with terrifying speed. Everything's fine, he said. Nora looked at him and saw a stranger who knew how to survive scandal better than he knew how to prevent it. The reporter hesitated. I was looking for a quote on the donor total. You'll get one, Nora said before Daniel could speak. Her voice came out calm, almost pleasant. And maybe later you can ask about Eastgate too. Daniel's gaze hit hers like a blade. The reporter, sensing blood without knowing its source, nodded too quickly and retreated. The ballroom music resumed its muffled seduction beyond the doors. Daniel lowered his voice to something cold enough to frost glass. Do not drag our children into your anger. Nora's eyes filled, not with softness, but rage so deep it steadied her. You already did. She walked past him then, back through the service doors, through the bright ballroom where donors laughed and glasses shone, and the campaign banner still promised a city families deserved. Leela stood near the exit, face pale. She had seen enough to know the shape of disaster, if not its full dimensions. Nora took her daughter's hand. Across the room, Ava was gone. Victor remained, watching from his table with that same private smile, as if a trap he'd set months ago had finally sprung, and he was pleased by the noise it made. Nora squeezed Lila's fingers and understood, with a chill that cut cleaner than heartbreak, that whatever was rotting inside her marriage was connected to something larger than betrayal. Money had moved, promises had been made, and somewhere in that machinery, her son's name had surfaced in Daniel's mouth like a warning. She did not know yet whether Ethan was a fool, a witness, or an accomplice. She only knew that by the time the applause ended, and the donors went home, the Whitaker family had already become the kind of story other people told in lowered voices. And Nora, who had spent half her life protecting the family name, felt a dangerous new thought settle into place with absolute clarity. If Daniel had built his power on secrets, then she would learn every one of them, even if the truth took the rest of them down with him. The thought did not feel brave. It felt cold, methodical, almost borrowed from a harder woman who had been living somewhere inside Nora for years, waiting for humiliation to make her useful. She guided Lila through the ballroom without hurrying, because hurrying was what guilty people did, and tonight she refused to carry the shape of anyone else's shame. Her heels sank slightly into the thick hotel carpet. The air near the exit smelled faintly of peonies from an arrangement on a pedestal table and burned butter from the kitchen doors. Someone called Daniel's name behind them. Another donor laughed too loudly. Lila's hand stayed in hers until the lobby, where the music thinned into a distant pulse, and the hotel's marble floor returned everything to the clean acoustics of money. Only then did Lila pull free and turn to face her. "Tell me what happened." Nora looked at her daughter and saw not a child demanding protection, but a young woman bracing for the truth before it could humiliate her in public. The sight nearly broke her composure. Lila wore a green dress. Nora had helped her zip an hour earlier, and one earring sat slightly crooked, probably from the moment she had grabbed Nora's elbow in the ballroom. Such a tiny imperfection. Nora wanted to fix it. She wanted to rewind the whole night and make the worst thing in the room a crooked earring. Instead, she said, "Your father and I are leaving separately." Lila stared. "That is not an answer." "No, it isn't." Nora glanced toward the glass doors where valet lights flashed across wet pavement. Rain had started while they were inside, the parking circle slick and black as spilled ink. "Do you want the truth right now? In the middle of a hotel lobby where 3 people know our last name and 2 more are about to pretend they don't?" Lila crossed her arms tight over herself. "I want you not to protect me from things I'm already old enough to see." The words landed clean. Nora inhaled slowly. The lobby air was cool enough to raise gooseflesh on her forearms. "Your father has been involved with Ava Mercer." Lila's eyes did not widen. They narrowed. "Involved how?" "The way you think." Lila looked away first, toward the revolving door, jaw flexing once. Her throat worked as she swallowed. "Since when?" He said a few months. "So, probably longer. Probably." Lila let out a short breath through her nose, almost a laugh, but hollow. "Wow." Then after a beat, "Ethan knows, doesn't he?" Nora felt something tighten behind her ribs. "Why would you say that?" Lila gave her a look so sharp it felt older than 19. "Because Ethan has been acting weird for weeks. He keeps calling Dad and then pretending it's about work. And because nobody in this family ever tells me anything until after the roof caves in." A couple in black tie drifted past them toward the elevators, speaking softly about school auctions and spring break. Nora waited until they were gone. "I don't know what Ethan knows, but your father said his name when I asked about business with Victor." "Business," Lila repeated with disgust. "That's what this is now?" Nora rubbed her thumb against the pad of her forefinger, a habit from years ago, when she used to do inventory at the gallery she'd once planned to open before life became a campaign calendar, and then a family machine. "I think there's more happening than an affair. With Dad, there's always more happening." Lila's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. That was Daniel in her, too. The discipline under stress. "Do you want me to come home with you?" For one selfish moment, Nora almost said yes. "Come home. Sit at the kitchen island. Be my witness. Help me not dissolve." But then she saw the tremor Lila was keeping out of her voice, and motherhood asserted itself through the wreckage. "No. You should go back to campus tomorrow. I mean that." "Mom." "Lila." Nora touched her cheek. "Let me do the first ugly part." Lila held her gaze, searching it, perhaps deciding whether her mother was asking for space or lying from habit. Finally, she nodded once. "Call me before you talk yourself into being noble." "I don't feel noble." "Good." That almost made Nora smile. Instead, she kissed her daughter's forehead and turned toward the valet stand, just as Daniel emerged into the lobby with Victor at his side, and 2 donors orbiting them like satellites. Daniel saw Nora immediately. His face remained composed, but his shoulders changed, becoming formal in a way she had only ever seen when he was preparing for hostile questions. Victor, by contrast, seemed energized. Rain silvered the windows behind them. Nora had a sudden memory of Victor at a Christmas party 12 years earlier, standing in their kitchen with a whiskey glass and complimenting the crown molding while his eyes measured the house, as if all intimacy were eventually convertible into square footage. She had disliked him on sight. Back then, Daniel had called it provincial suspicion. "Nora," Daniel said as he approached. Voice pitched for the room. "Can we talk?" "Not here," she replied. One of the donors, a banker with a face like kneaded dough, pretended to study his phone. Victor slipped a hand into his coat pocket. "Weather turned on us," he said. "Spring, in North Carolina." Nora turned fully toward him. "How long have you been using my family?" The banker looked up, startled. Daniel's mouth thinned. Victor, infuriatingly, only seemed interested. "That's a dramatic verb. You should appreciate drama. You've funded enough of it." Daniel stepped between them by half an inch, enough to signal control without seeming aggressive. "Victor, give us a minute." Victor's gaze moved from Daniel to Nora to Lila, who had gone rigid several feet away. Then he inclined his head with exaggerated civility. Of course, he took the donors with him, but not before Nora caught that same private smile again, almost invisible, like a man watching pieces advance across a board only he fully understood. Daniel waited until they were out of earshot. "Don't do that again." Nora laughed softly, astonished by the nerve. "You still think you're in a position to instruct me? I'm trying to keep this contained. Contained for whom? For Lila? For Ethan? For all of us? No. For you." Rain tapped harder against the glass doors. A valet jogged through the circle with an umbrella held sideways against the wind. Daniel lowered his voice. "Come home. We'll talk privately. Privately is what got us here." "Nora." He reached for her wrist, then stopped before touching her. "Good," she thought dimly. "Learn something. Whatever you think is going on with Victor, this is not the place to force it." "Then, you should have chosen a better place to ruin everything." The words landed harder than she intended. Daniel flinched, small but real. For a second, she glimpsed not the councilman, not the husband who had betrayed her, but the young man she had met at 26 with ambition in his posture and hunger in his eyes, the one who had once sat on the hood of her car outside a county fair and told her he wanted to build a life big enough to protect everyone he loved. She had mistaken appetite for devotion. "I'm taking my car," she said. "Do not come to the house tonight." His stare sharpened. "You can't keep me out of my own house. Watch me." She turned before he could answer. Lila was already moving toward the valet stand to intercept the car. Nora heard Daniel say her name once, quietly this time, almost pleading, but she did not stop. The drive home took 23 minutes in rain. Nora knew because she looked at the dashboard clock at every red light, as if time itself might reveal a hidden pattern if measured often enough. Windshield wipers thudded back and forth. Streetlights smeared amber across the glass. She drove with both hands tight on the wheel and replayed the corridor conversation until each line began to separate from emotion and arrange itself into information. Eastgate parcels, rezoning hearing next month, father's estate tied up in adjacent land through the trust. Ethan involved informally. Ava introduced by Victor to keep messaging clean. Nothing that can't be handled. Each phrase glowed in her head like evidence tags. By the time she reached the house in Hayes Barton, the grief had not lessened, but it had acquired structure. Their home sat back from the street behind old maples and trimmed boxwoods, gracious and lit like a magazine spread. The porch lanterns cast warm cones over the wet brick path. From outside, it looked exactly like the house of a stable public family. Nora sat in the car with the engine idling and stared at it. So much of her adult life had been spent making this facade true enough to inhabit. Holiday cards at the front steps, graduation parties on the lawn, pot roast on winter Sundays. Quiet arguments ended before the children came downstairs. The house held years of compromise the way old wood held polish, layer after layer until the grain itself disappeared. When she finally went inside, the silence met her first, then the faint scent of lemon oil from the hall table and the roses she had arranged that morning before dressing for the fundraiser. They were opening now, full and red in a ceramic bowl, and the sight of them nearly undid her. She set her clutch down carefully, as if sudden motion might splinter her, then took off her shoes and stood barefoot on the foyer runner listening to nothing. No television. No dishwasher. No footsteps overhead. The house had the suspended quality of a theater after the audience leaves, but before the set is struck. She walked to Daniel's office before she consciously decided to. The room was at the back of the first floor, paneled in blue-gray, lined with books chosen partly for content and partly for spine color. His desk sat beneath two framed black-and-white photographs of Raleigh in the 1960s, before redevelopment and demolitions, and the civic pieties men like Victor recited while buying neighborhoods one hearing at a time. Nora closed the office door behind her and stood still. She had rarely invaded this room. That had been another marital fiction. Respect for boundaries. In truth, it had been a division of kingdoms. Daniel handled public life and finances. Nora handled atmosphere, continuity, the human temperature of the family. Tonight the arrangement looked less like respect than strategic blindness. She moved to the desk. The leather chair sighed when she pulled it back. His computer was locked, of course, but the top drawer, unexpectedly, was not. Inside were pens, campaign envelopes, a church bulletin from 2 Sundays ago, and a brass key on a plain ring with no label. Nora picked it up. It was small, probably for a file cabinet or a locking drawer somewhere else. Beneath it lay a folded copy of the Eastgate zoning agenda, the city seal visible on the corner. She unfolded it slowly. Parcel numbers, stakeholder summaries, estimated tax revenue, community objections. One parcel number had been circled in blue ink. Beside it, Daniel had written, in his compact legal hand, check trust boundary overlap before hearing. Another note, this one in darker ink, read, VM says Ethan can smooth owner holdout. Nora stared at the initials. VM. Victor Sloan. Ethan can smooth owner holdout. The phrase was so ugly in its casualness that her stomach turned. Smooth. Owner holdout. As if the obstacle were not a person with a house or a store or a life, but a wrinkle in tablecloth linen. Nora sat back, paper trembling slightly in her fingers. Had Ethan pressured someone? Offered money? Delivered threats he didn't recognize as threats because he had been raised among people who called coercion negotiation? She thought of her son at 16, charming his way out of a speeding ticket with a grin and an apology so polished the officer had laughed. Daniel had called it leadership potential. Nora had called it dangerous. Neither of them had understood how expensive that trait might become in a grown man surrounded by sharks. She rose and went to the built-in cabinet near the window. Locked. She tried the brass key. Wrong fit. Her pulse ticked higher. In the bottom shelf sat 2 campaign storage boxes. In one she found old mailers, polling memos, donor spreadsheets. In the other, tucked beneath binders, was a slim digital recorder wrapped in a charging cord. Nora froze with it in her hand. It was the cheap kind, utilitarian, black plastic, with a scratched screen. Not Daniel's usual style. She turned it over. A small red sticker marked one side, M3. She pressed power. The battery icon flashed half full. A list of audio files appeared, each titled by date. The most recent was from 4 nights earlier. Nora hesitated, thumb hovering. Then she pressed play. At first, there was only fabric rustle and the hollow scrape of a chair. Then Victor's voice, unmistakable, dry and confident. He doesn't have the stomach for this. Another voice answered. Younger, male, tense. Ethan. Nora's hand clenched so hard around the recorder that the edge bit her palm. I told you, Ethan said. I just passed the message along. And the man still hasn't signed. Because he wants more money. No, Victor said, almost lazily. Because now he thinks he has leverage. A pause. Ice clinked in glass. Ethan again, lower. My dad said no pressure. Victor laughed under his breath. Your father says many things when he wants to preserve the fantasy that he remains separate from outcomes. Nora stopped breathing. She could hear Ethan shifting, the nervous jangle of a son trying to sound like a man in a room where money defined adulthood. I'm out if this turns ugly, Ethan said. Too late for that, Victor replied. You took the meeting. You used the family name. You let him believe the councilman's office cared personally. That bell doesn't unring. Nora stopped the recording. The house was silent again, except for the thud of her own pulse. She lowered herself slowly into Daniel's chair because her knees had lost conviction. Ethan, not just mentioned, not adjacent, in it. However naive, however manipulated, he was in it. Her mind flew not toward politics first, but toward practical maternal panic. Could he be charged? Could his messages be subpoenaed? Had he threatened a property owner? Had Victor recorded all of them? She looked down at the device in her hand and understood with a sick clarity why Victor had been smiling in the ballroom. Leverage was not a side effect. It was the system. The affair, Ethan, the parcels, the hearing, all of it connected by people holding pieces they could trade when loyalty failed. Nora listened to 2 more files. One captured Daniel and Victor arguing in a car about donor timing and the Mercer problem. Another, older, contained Ava's voice, controlled but angry. I told you I'm not being your firewall for him, Victor answered. You already are. Nora stopped there. She sat in the dim office while rain whispered at the window and the recorder rested in her lap like a weapon left on a table after everyone else had fled. Part of her wanted to call Ethan immediately. Demand everything. Hear his breathing. Make him small enough again to save. Another part knew panic could drive him straight back to Daniel, back into whatever half-truths fathers told sons to keep them useful. She set the recorder down carefully and forced herself to think in order. First, copy files. Second, secure documents. Third, find out who the holdout owner was and whether the person was safe, intimidated, or already bought. Fourth, Understand Ava's position before Daniel could turn her into either villain or collateral. The list steadied her. Action always had. Long before marriage, before Daniel, before politics, Nora had spent 2 years managing a gallery owner who drank through invoices and lied with such conviction that facts had to be rescued daily from his charm. She had been good at that job, better than anyone knew. She crossed to the hall closet, found an old laptop Daniel never used, and brought it to the office. Her hands shook only once as she connected the recorder. Outside, headlights swept the front windows and paused. Daniel. Nora went still. The engine idled in the driveway. She could picture him through the rain-streaked windshield, both hands on the wheel, deciding whether to enter a house that no longer belonged to his version of events. The office clock ticked loud in the hush. Nora looked at the screen while the first audio file copied, its progress bar inching forward with excruciating calm. In the driveway, the engine cut off. A car door opened, then shut. Footsteps moved across wet brick toward the porch, unhurried now, almost gentle. She felt fear then, but not of violence, of skill, of the old, devastating possibility that Daniel would walk in, lower his voice, summon history, and make confusion sound like love, until she doubted the evidence in her own hand. She straightened in his chair and fixed her eyes on the laptop screen as the front door unlocked downstairs and the house, at last, admitted the man who had built his life on being welcomed home. Welcomed home. Nora heard him set his keys down in the foyer bowl, with the same precise little clink he made every night. The domestic punctuation of a man who liked ritual when it affirmed ownership. Then came silence, longer than it should have been, and she knew he was listening, orienting himself to the house the way a hunter paused at a tree line. The old floorboards did not betray him at first. He moved through the front hall on the runner, then into the kitchen where a cabinet door opened and shut. Glass against stone, water running. Even now, apparently, he required a drink and a performance of calm before a confrontation. Nora kept her eyes on the laptop screen until the transfer bar reached the end of the first file, and the second began. Her fingers were cold. She rubbed them once against the silk of her dress, then realized she still had not changed out of the fundraiser clothes, was still wearing the version of herself designed to stand beside him and soften his ambition into family values. The thought made her rise abruptly. She stripped off the earrings first and set them on the desk in 2 tiny metallic clicks. Then the bracelet, then the campaign wife heels that she had carried upstairs without noticing. Barefoot in Daniel's office, with a digital recorder plugged into a dusty laptop, she felt closer to herself than she had in years. The office door remained open because closing it now would sound like fear. Below, the water stopped. She heard the ice clink in a glass, then his footsteps crossing the kitchen tile and entering the back hall. He did not call for her. That told her he already knew where she would be. Another thing about long marriages. Eventually, even rebellion becomes legible. He appeared in the doorway without knocking. Jacket removed, tie loosened, one hand around a tumbler. Rain had darkened the shoulders of his white shirt, where drops had soaked through. He looked older than he had under the ballroom chandeliers, not softened, but stripped, the public finish gone. His cheek still held the faintest trace of where she had struck him. He saw the laptop, the recorder, the open zoning packet. His gaze sharpened, then flattened into caution. "How much did you hear?" he asked. Not hello. Not are you all right. Not I'm sorry. Information first. Nora felt something inside her finally stop hoping. Enough. Daniel set the glass down on the bookshelf with exaggerated care. That recorder doesn't mean what you think it means. You may want to revise your opening strategy, Nora said quietly. Tonight hasn't been kind to your credibility. He stood still, watching her, perhaps measuring how much contrition the situation required, and for which offense. It had always unnerved Nora how quickly he could assess emotional terrain and decide whether tenderness, indignation, humor, or silence would best preserve advantage. Once she had mistaken that for maturity, now it looked like a professional hazard that had metastasized into character. I should have told you about Ava, he said at last. That's one sentence. You need several. I'm trying to start with the piece that belongs to us. There is no piece that belongs only to us anymore. She gestured toward the papers. You brought our son into a land fight with Victor Sloan. You let some woman be used as a firewall. You lied to me for months. Whatever marriage we had, you fed it into the machinery a long time ago. Daniel's jaw flexed once. Ethan is not in danger. You do not get to say that like fact. He met with a property owner. That's all. That is not all. She tapped the recorder. I heard Victor tell him the family name had already been used. I heard Ethan say he was out if it turned ugly. Because Ethan panics when things get messy. He learned from you. Daniel looked away, just for a second, then back. Victor records everyone. It's insurance. That's what this is. No. Insurance protects against loss. This is leverage. The rain had weakened outside. In the pause between them, Nora could hear the soft hum of the HVAC, and from somewhere deeper in the house, the refrigerator cycling on. Ordinary sounds. It struck her with sick clarity that houses did not care what happened inside them. They kept temperature, they held dishes, they watched. "Who is the holdout owner?" she asked. "Nora, say the name." He did not answer quickly enough. "You don't know," she said. "That's the worst part. You signed onto the pressure and left the human being abstract. I know exactly who he is." "Then say it." Daniel exhaled, controlled but frayed. "Miguel Alvarez. He owns the corner auto shop on Kent Street." Nora repeated the name silently. Miguel Alvarez. A real person now. A shop, a street, a life interrupted by men with capital and sun-shaped messengers. And what exactly did Ethan say to him? "I wasn't there, but you sent him." "I did not send him. Victor brought him in because Ethan wanted access, wanted to be useful, wanted to prove he could handle a deal. He is 23. That doesn't make him a child. It makes him vulnerable to older men who call exploitation mentorship." Daniel's mouth hardened. At some point, Ethan's choices are his own. Nora stared at him, astonished anew by the moral convenience of ambition. "You made every hallway in his life lead toward men like Victor. You told him that proximity to power was adulthood. You taught him to confuse being invited into a room with being respected in it. And now that he's in over his head, you want to promote him from son to co-conspirator, because it lets you sleep." Daniel's nostrils flared. For a second, anger overrode management. "You don't get to act like you had no part in how he turned out." The words landed, and because there was truth in them, they hurt more. Nora felt it physically, a contraction in her chest. Ethan had inherited not only Daniel's appetite but Nora's tendency to smooth discomfort until it hardened into structure. She had protected him from consequences more than once, excused charm that should have been corrected, looked away when advantage showed too early in his smile because part of her wanted at least one child to move through the world without flinching. "No," she said, voice lower now. "I do not get to do that. But I also do not get to listen to you make our failures sound equal." Daniel pressed the heel of one hand against the desk. "Victor came to me last year with Eastgate. The city wanted tax growth. The neighborhood association was split. My father's trust owned adjacent parcels through old industrial holdings nobody had looked at in years. It was supposed to be manageable. Manageable for whom? For everyone, if it was done right." Nora almost laughed. That phrase should be carved over every doorway in American corruption. He ignored the jab, or pretended to. Then costs went up. Alvarez wouldn't sell. Victor got impatient. Ethan was trying to break into development in Charlotte and kept asking me to make introductions. I told him not to get involved in anything local. He met Victor anyway. You say that as if gravity pulled them together. Daniel's gaze dropped to the recorder. Ava found out Victor was recording meetings. She confronted him. "That's probably the clip you heard. And your affair with her?" He went still. The question changed the room. Business had given him language. Betrayal stripped it away. "It started after the campaign launch," he said. "She was handling messaging. We were working late. I was already under pressure with the trust issue and Victor and Ethan. I felt." Nora held up a hand. "Be very careful." He shut his mouth. Good, she thought. Let at least one terrible sentence die unborn tonight. "Did she know about Eastgate?" Nora asked. "Some of it." "Did she know about Ethan?" "Not at first." "Did she threaten to expose you?" "No." The answer came too quickly to trust. Nora watched him. "Did Victor use her to get closer to you?" "I don't know." Another instant answer. More likely true then, because it humiliated him. "Did you love her?" That shook him. He blinked once, slow, and looked at the floor before lifting his head again. "It doesn't matter. Everything matters now." His face changed, some hidden seam splitting just enough to show exhaustion beneath. "I don't know what I felt," he said. "I felt wanted in a way that had nothing to do with office, or donors, or being somebody's father. I felt seen before I spoke, and I knew while it was happening that I was blowing a hole in our life. And still I kept stepping into it because every other part of me felt like negotiation." Nora listened, and against her will the honesty in that answer entered her. Not as forgiveness, as injury with texture. She remembered the early years when Daniel had come home from city committee meetings angry at older men who dismissed him, and she had stood in this very room with her hands on his face, telling him he did not need their approval to be real. Somewhere along the way she had stopped being where he felt seen, and become where he stored the parts of himself he no longer wanted to examine. She hated him for it. She hated herself for noticing the path. You should have been miserable, honestly, she said, not comforted dishonestly. He almost smiled at that, a reflex toward the old intimacy of language, but the expression died halfway. You think I wasn't miserable? I think you were selective. The laptop chimed softly. Another file copied complete. Nora closed the folder window without taking her eyes off him. I'm making a duplicate. Daniel looked from the screen to her face. For who? For me. That should be enough to terrify you. Nora, listen to me. If that recording goes anywhere before I can control the context, Ethan gets dragged through it. Victor survives. Men like him always survive. But Ethan, and maybe Lila by proximity, they'll carry the stain. You think the press will draw fine moral distinctions? So now you care about stain. I care about our children. You care that their damage can become your headline. He pushed away from the desk and paced once to the window, then back, drink forgotten on the shelf. The movement was unlike him, too loose, almost panicked. I am trying to prevent disaster. You are late. Not too late. You don't know that. His voice sharpened. Then tell me what you want. The question hung between them. Nora realized he meant it strategically, as in, name your terms, identify your price, define your containment. But beneath that was something else, rawer and more frightening. He genuinely did not know what repair could look like, because he had spent so long treating damage as a communications problem. Nora stood slowly. The office lamp cast warm light over the desk, leaving the corners of the room in shadow. She was suddenly aware of how tired her feet were, how her scalp ached where bobby pins tugged, how one shoulder had tightened from carrying tension since the ballroom. These banal physical complaints moved through her, like proof of embodiment. This was real. Bodies held the cost before reputations did. What do I want? She repeated. I want the truth without editing. I want Ethan protected from Victor, not merely insulated from optics. I want to know whether Miguel Alvarez was threatened. I want to know why Ava looked sad instead of smug. I want my daughter not to learn that family means managing men's appetites. I want one honest hour in this house before anybody starts bargaining. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. When he lowered them, he looked older still. Ava isn't the villain in this. I didn't say she was. Victor pushed her into the campaign because she had dirt from an old contract dispute involving his company and her previous firm. He offered to bury it if she came in-house for him unofficially, while working for me officially. I found out later. Nora stared. And still you kept sleeping with her. Shame crossed his face then, unmistakable, and for one ferocious second, Nora was grateful to see it. Yes. Did you think you were rescuing her? No. He swallowed. I think I told myself a lot of flattering lies, but not that one. Good. Nora moved past him to the shelf where his drink sat and lifted the tumbler. She did not throw it. She set it on the desk instead, directly atop the zoning agenda, leaving a ring of condensation over parcel numbers and notes. You're going to call Ethan. Daniel tensed. Tonight? Now. He'll panic. He should. Not over the phone. Then tell him to come here. Daniel hesitated just long enough to confirm fear. He's not in Charlotte. Nora felt the room narrow. Where is he? Downtown, at Victor's place. For a moment all sound in the house seemed to withdraw. Even the HVAC went quiet between cycles. Nora saw, with terrible clarity, Ethan in some polished condo or hotel suite above the city, trying to negotiate adulthood with men who monetized weakness. Perhaps half drunk, perhaps terrified, perhaps still believing this could be spun into opportunity if he said the right thing. Since when? She asked. He called after the fundraiser, said Victor wanted to talk before things got distorted. Distorted. The word came out like a blade sliding free. By whom? Reality? Daniel reached for his phone. Nora watched his thumb hover before he dialed. He put the call on speaker without being told. It rang 4 times. Then Ethan answered, voice tight and overbright. Hey. Music thumped faintly behind him. Male voices, laughter, glasses. Nora closed her eyes briefly. Of course Victor would keep noise around him. Noise made truth harder to isolate. Where are you? Daniel asked. I told you. Just talking. Come home. A pause. Now's not great. Nora stepped closer and spoke before Daniel could soften it. Ethan, it's your mother. Get out of that apartment right now. Silence on the line. Then Ethan, stripped of polish in an instant, all boy beneath the man costume. Mom? Right now. What happened? Leave first. She heard him moving then, the muffled scrape of a chair, a door opening, the acoustics changing as he stepped into a hallway. His breathing got louder in the microphone. Did Dad tell you? Enough. Are you alone? No. I mean, now I am. Mom, it's not how it looks. Nora closed her hand around the back of Daniel's chair until her knuckles whitened. Then for your sake, I hope it looks worse. Ethan made a small, helpless sound. I didn't threaten anybody. Did you imply your father could help or hurt Alvarez through city channels? I just said it would go smoother if he worked with the project. Daniel shut his eyes. Nora felt a sick wave rise and pass. That is a threat, when it comes from the councilman's son. I know that now. Did Victor tell you to say it? He said, to sound confident. The hallway on Ethan's end echoed. An elevator bell chimed faintly. Come home, Nora said, and do not speak to Victor again tonight. He'll freak out. Let him. Ethan breathed hard once, twice. Okay. The line went dead. Daniel lowered the phone slowly. Husband and wife stood in the office amid copied recordings, zoning papers, and the residue of a life that had just crossed from deception into evidence. You happy? He asked, not cruelly, but with the bleakness of a man who knows he has lost control of sequence. Nora considered the question. Happy was so absurd it almost belonged to another species. No, she said, but I am done being the last person in this family to know what danger sounds like. Somewhere downstairs, the front alarm chirped softly as the system reset, a little domestic sound of locks and monitored entrances, the house performing security while every real breach stood inside it, breathing. Daniel sank into the chair by the window and stared at the rain-dark yard. For the first time in all their years together, Nora saw him not as powerful or weak, not even as husband or enemy, but as a man who had mistaken access for immunity, until the bill came due in his own voice, his son's voice, his wife's silence. She did not pity him, but she understood that whatever came next would not be a cleansing. It would be triage of a different sort, moral and familial, deciding which truths could save Ethan without preserving Daniel, which lies could shield Lila without teaching her cowardice, which public fire could be allowed to burn, so that a worse private rot did not remain buried under the house forever. They waited that way, the office clock marking seconds with indifferent precision, until headlights turned into the drive again, and washed across the bookshelves like a searchlight, and Nora knew their son had come home, not to safety but to judgment. Judgment announced itself in small sounds before it took human form. The crunch of tires on wet gravel at the edge of the drive, the dull thud of a car door, the quick uneven footsteps on brick, the front lock turning too fast because Ethan had never learned to hide panic from objects. Nora remained standing beside the desk, arms folded so tightly her fingertips pressed crescents into the skin above her elbows. Daniel did not rise from the chair by the window. He looked at the door instead, as if concentration alone could restore authority before their son crossed the threshold. Footsteps sounded in the foyer, then in the hall. Ethan appeared in the office doorway, breathing hard, his hair damp from rain, blazer unbuttoned, collar crooked. He looked handsome in the careless, expensive way Daniel always found forgivable in men. Tonight, the polish could not conceal the boy underneath. His eyes moved first to Nora, then to Daniel, then to the recorder and the papers on the desk, and with each shift, his face lost another degree of confidence. Okay, he said, too quickly. I'm here. No one answered immediately. The silence lengthened until Ethan took one step into the room and stopped again. Nora watched him the way she used to watch him at age 7, when he had lied about breaking a neighbor's window, not because the lie had been convincing, but because she was waiting to see whether he would choose confession before he was cornered. He had not then. He looked no more ready now. Shut the door, Nora said. Ethan obeyed. The latch clicked with absurd softness. He shoved both hands into his pockets, and then, perhaps realizing that looked defensive, pulled them out again and dragged one over his mouth. Mom, before anybody says anything, I know this looks bad. Stop using that sentence, Nora said. Everything that matters now is worse than how it looks. Ethan flinched. Daniel rose at last, slow and deliberate, like a man trying not to spook a wounded animal. Sit down, he said. No, Nora replied before Ethan could move. He can stand. Daniel's head turned toward her, irritation sparking and then being banked. Ethan looked between them. Jesus. You don't get to be overwhelmed first, Nora said. Start talking. Ethan swallowed. Up close, she could see the tiny sheen of sweat above his upper lip, the quick pulse at the base of his throat. He smelled faintly of rainwater, expensive cologne, and whiskey he probably believed he had hidden with gum. Victor wanted me to help with a holdout, he said. That's all it was at first. He said the guy trusted local names more than developers. He said I could make an introduction, maybe calm him down. Calm him down about losing his property, Nora said. You hear yourself? Ethan's jaw tightened. I know how it sounds. There it is again. Mom. He ran both hands through his hair and began pacing 2 short steps in one direction. 2 back, the room too small for the panic he'd brought in with him. I wasn't trying to intimidate anybody. Victor said Alvarez was already asking for more money, that he was playing everybody, and Dad kept saying he couldn't be directly involved. So I figured, you figured what? Nora asked. That if you used your father's office without technically using it, the sin would stay theoretical? Ethan stopped pacing. Dad knew I was around it. Daniel spoke for the first time since Ethan entered. I told you not to meet with Alvarez alone. Ethan let out a short, disbelieving laugh. That's your defense? Alone? The bitterness in his voice hit the room like a thrown glass. Nora saw Daniel absorb it, straighten against it, and for a second she glimpsed the years ahead if nothing changed. Father and son becoming mirrors that hated each other because reflection was too accurate. I'm not defending any of this, Daniel said. Then what are you doing? Ethan shot back. Because every time something gets ugly, you start talking like a press conference. Nora looked at her son, startled by the precision of the accusation. Ethan noticed and shook his head once, almost angrily, as if he resented making sense in front of her. Victor told me this was how business worked, he said. Pressure, deadlines, leverage, all of it. He said if I wanted in, I had to stop acting squeamish. Dad never said he was wrong. He just said, be careful. Daniel's face hardened. Victor is not the standard I taught you. No, Ethan said. You taught me a better-dressed version. The words landed with a silence so complete Nora could hear rain dripping from the gutter outside the office window. Daniel went still. Ethan's own expression changed as soon as he said it. Shock giving way to the sick realization that truth, once spoken aloud, could not be managed back into filial respect. Nora should have intervened then, perhaps, should have broken the line between them before it cut deeper, but she didn't. Some part of her wanted Daniel to hear himself from another male mouth, stripped of marriage and sentiment. Tell me exactly what happened with Alvarez, she said. Ethan dragged a hand down his face. I met him at his shop 3 days ago. Victor told me to go in casual, talk neighborhood, say redevelopment was inevitable, and it'd be smarter to negotiate while there was goodwill. Goodwill, Nora repeated flatly. Yeah. He did not meet her eyes. He was polite at first, old school polite. Offered coffee, asked if my dad knew I was there. I said Dad wasn't directly involved, but everybody wanted a solution. Then he got pissed. Said men in suits had been circling his block for 6 months, and now the councilman's son shows up smiling and calling it a solution. Ethan swallowed again. I said, nobody wanted problems. He said that sounded like a threat. I told him it wasn't. Then I said something stupid. Nora waited. What? I said, projects like this don't stop because one person digs in. His voice had gone quiet enough that the HVAC almost swallowed it, and after I said it, I heard it the way he heard it. Nora closed her eyes for a second. Miguel Alvarez in his own shop, hearing inevitability spoken in the language of young money and civic confidence. A man's life reduced to an obstacle by someone else's son. Did you apologize? She asked. Ethan shook his head. He told me to get out. And then? I told Victor it went bad. And he recorded the conversation afterward, Nora said. Ethan blinked. You heard that? Enough of it. Shame flooded his face. It made him look suddenly younger, softer around the mouth, less composed. I didn't know he recorded everything. Not at first. Daniel spoke sharply. Why were you at his apartment tonight? Because after the fundraiser he called and said things were moving too fast and we needed to get our story straight before Mom or Ava blew something up. Nora's gaze flicked to Daniel, then back to Ethan. He said my name? Not you specifically. He said, family panic makes people unpredictable. Nora gave a cold, humorless smile. For once he's not wrong. Ethan shifted his weight. Mom, I swear, I didn't know about you and Ava until like an hour ago. That sentence does not comfort me. I know. He looked at Daniel then, and the contempt there was new enough to still be painful. I thought Dad was just keeping campaign stuff compartmentalized. I didn't know he was sleeping with her. Daniel's mouth tightened. Lower your voice. Why? Ethan snapped. The neighbor's going to lose respect for our values? Nora felt something inside her lurch between grief and disgust. There they were, her husband, her son, both fluent in the family dialect of damage control, using it now as weaponry because the alternative would be confession without defenses. She moved to the desk, braced both palms against the wood, and leaned forward slightly. Listen to me, both of you. I am not interested in who gets to be more hurt by the truth. I am interested in what exposure exists, who has it, and how much of Ethan's stupidity becomes criminal if Victor needs a shield. Ethan's face drained. Criminal? Did you text Alvarez? A couple times. Show me. He pulled out his phone with stiff fingers. Nora extended her hand. He hesitated. That hurt more than she expected. Her own son, measuring whether to surrender evidence to his mother. Then he gave it to her. The messages were all there, blue and gray bubbles under the contact name Miguel A. The first had been civil. Appreciate your time today, sir. Want to keep this productive. The second was worse. There's still a path here, if we can get aligned before the hearing. The third, sent after Alvarez had not replied, made Nora's stomach turn. Nobody wants city attention landing the hard way over a simple sale. Ethan had added a thumbs-up emoji, as if friendliness could soften menace. Nora looked up slowly. Ethan had gone ashen. Victor drafted that one, he said. I know that doesn't matter, but he basically dictated it. It matters, Nora said. It just doesn't absolve you. Daniel took the phone from her and read the thread, his face changing by degrees, each line stripping away another layer of strategic optimism. Delete nothing, Nora said. Back it up. Right now. Ethan stared. Mom, what are we doing? She almost laughed at that. All evening, everyone had been asking versions of the same question, as if action were stranger than deceit. We are stopping this family from lying in 6 directions at once. Ethan sat down without permission this time, suddenly boneless, elbows on knees, hands clasped so hard the knuckles blanched. Victor said Alvarez was bluffing. He said these guys always bark about community and history and then take the money. The contempt in the quoted phrase hung in the room like smoke. Nora looked at her son and saw him hearing it now, maybe for the first time, from outside the seduction of access. Did you believe him? She asked. Ethan stared at the floorboards. I wanted to. Because? He rubbed his forehead with the heel of his hand. Because I'm tired of being treated like I'm failing before I start. Dad's got this whole city-scale life, and Lila's the smart one, and every room I walk into, somebody's already decided I'm just the charming screw-up with a good last name. Victor made it sound like I could matter if I stopped hesitating. Nora felt the confession hit somewhere tender she had not armored in time. There it was, the little wound under all the swagger, not innocence, need. The most marketable weakness in America. She thought of every man Ethan had admired in the last 5 years. All of them older, richer, brisk in the way they made ethics sound like insecurity. She had seen the gravitational pull and named it arrogance when sometimes it was hunger to become substantial in the eyes of other men. And did it work? She asked softly. Ethan laughed once, a ragged exhale. Do I look like it worked? Daniel moved toward the desk. Self-pity is not useful. Ethan shot upright from the chair. You don't get to say that to me tonight. His voice cracked on the last word, humiliation breaking through anger. You brought him into our lives. You let him talk to me like I was a junior partner as long as it helped you. And now suddenly I'm supposed to be the cautionary tale? Daniel stepped forward too. I am trying to keep you from becoming the defendant. The word landed hard. Ethan went still. Nora did too. Defendant. Daniel had not meant to say it out loud. That much was clear from the immediate regret in his face. So that's real, Ethan said, his voice smaller now. That's actually real. Daniel scrubbed a hand over his mouth. It could become real if Victor decides to distance himself. That is why you're going to do exactly what I say. Nora straightened. No, he is not taking instructions from you alone. Nora, with respect, you do not know how these cases move. With respect, she said, you are the reason a case may exist. The office seemed to shrink around them. Outside, the rain had mostly stopped, leaving the window dark and reflective. Their faces floated faintly in the glass, a family portrait distorted by interior light. Ethan looked from one parent to the other, terror now openly seated in his features. What do I do? He asked. It was the first honest question he had asked all night. Nora answered before Daniel could. You tell the truth in here before anyone tells lies out there. Daniel shook his head. That's naive. No, she said. Naive was believing secrecy only grows where marriage is concerned. This is triage now, and you do not get to own the operating table. He glared at her. The metaphor would have amused her in another life. Instead, she went on. First, Ethan saves all messages, voicemails, emails, anything from Victor, Ava, or Alvarez. Second, we identify who else attended meetings. Third, tomorrow morning, I want the name of a criminal defense attorney who has never taken a donation from you, Victor, or anyone attached to Eastgate. Ethan stared. A lawyer? Daniel answered, clipped. Yes, quietly. Nora watched her son absorb that, watched adulthood arrive not as freedom but as paperwork and fear. His breathing shortened. He sat back down and bent forward, elbows on his thighs, face in his hands. For one terrible moment he looked 6 again after falling off a bike, all stunned dignity and delayed pain. Nora's body moved before strategy could stop it. She crossed to him and rested one hand between his shoulders. His back was rigid under the damp blazer. He did not lean into her, but he did not move away. "Look at me," she said. He lifted his face slowly. His eyes were red now. "Did you ever, in any conversation, imply that your father could hurt Alvarez through permits, inspections, rezoning, code enforcement, any of it?" Ethan shook his head. "Not directly. That qualifier matters." He swallowed. "I said the city gets impatient when projects stall. And I said being on the wrong side of momentum can make life harder. I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," Nora said. "I'm asking what you said." Tears did not fall, but shame did its work just as visibly. "Then yes," he whispered. Daniel turned away toward the window. Nora kept her hand on Ethan's back a second longer, then withdrew it because comfort could not become absolution. "Did Victor ever mention reporters?" she asked. "He said if Alvarez tried playing victim in the press, there were ways to remind people his permits weren't exactly immaculate. Blackmail adjacent," Nora murmured. Daniel spoke without turning around. "Victor speaks in hypotheticals. Only because it's cheaper than indictable verbs," Nora said. Ethan let out a shaky breath. "What about Ava?" Nora looked at him sharply. "What about her? She came by the apartment before I left. She was fighting with Victor. She said he'd gone too far, and he said she was confused about loyalty. Then she saw me and told me to go home, like she was scared I'd hear more." Daniel finally turned from the window. "When?" "Like 20 minutes before you called." Nora studied his face. Fear moved there now, more visible than guilt had been. Not fear of losing her, fear of sequence again, of what information existed in which hands, of who might defect first. "Does she have copies?" Nora asked. Daniel hesitated. That was answer enough. Ethan stared between them. "Copies of what?" "Recordings," Nora said. "Documents, maybe." Ethan let out a hollow curse and stood up again, energy surging back through panic. "Then Victor's going to go after her." "Maybe," Daniel said. "Or maybe he thinks he can still contain her." Nora felt the night shift beneath them yet again. Ava, who had begun as betrayal and silk, and now stood revealed as both compromised and potentially crucial. Not innocent, not simple, but caught inside the same machinery from a different angle. Nora thought of the sadness on her face in the ballroom, the controlled grief of someone already too deep in a mistake to claim surprise. "Call her," Nora said. Daniel's head snapped toward her. "No." "Why not?" "Because if she's spooked, any contact from me will make it worse." "You mean, more traceable?" "I mean, she won't trust the motive." Ethan looked between them. "I can call." Both parents turned. "No," Daniel said immediately. Nora ignored him. "Would she pick up for you?" Ethan shrugged uneasily. "Maybe. She was weirdly nice to me. Like she pitied me." "Sensible woman," Nora murmured. Daniel's patience finally frayed. "This is absurd. We are not improvising legal exposure in the middle of the night based on wounded feelings and half-heard recordings." Nora stepped toward him, fury returning with such clarity it steadied her voice. "No. We are responding to the fact that your private sins and public corruption now overlap so completely, you can't distinguish one emergency from another. You want process because process gives you time to edit. I want contact before Victor decides the vulnerable pieces on his board are expendable." Daniel stared at her. For an instant, beneath anger, she saw respect there, reluctant and sharp. Too late, too useless. Ethan pulled his phone back out, looking from one to the other like a child of divorce on fast forward, already learning that when parents split, truth itself came in competing instructions. Nora hated that she was teaching him this while trying to undo what other lessons had made of him. "Text her," she said. "Nothing incriminating. Ask if she's safe." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "Fine. But if she responds, nobody says anything substantive until we know where she is." Ethan typed with clumsy thumbs. The three of them watched the screen as if a whole future might rise through glass. Message sent. No response. Ethan looked up. "Now what?" Nora glanced at the recorder. The copied files, the zoning papers stained with condensation, the husband by the window, the son with threat texts on his phone, and felt the first edges of dawnless exhaustion pushing at her bones. Somewhere upstairs were fresh towels, framed family pictures, unopened mail, all the ordinary artifacts of a life that had not agreed to become evidence. Yet evidence was what it had become. "Now," she said, "we wait exactly long enough to know whether Ava answers, and then we decide whether this family spends tomorrow protecting each other from truth or from Victor. We do not get to do both." Ethan sank back into the chair, staring at the phone in his hand. Daniel lifted his untouched drink from the desk, looked at it, and set it down again. No one spoke. In the silence that followed, the screen lit suddenly against Ethan's palm. and all three of them saw Ava's name appear at once. Ava's name appear at once. The screen glowed in Ethan's hand with a clean, white brutality, the kind of digital light that made everything around it look suddenly older and more tired. Ethan looked up first at Nora, then at Daniel, as if permission itself had become radioactive. "Open it," Nora said. Ethan swallowed and tapped. The message was short. "Are you home? Don't answer if he's there." Nora felt Daniel's silence harden beside the window. Ethan's thumb hovered. "What do I say?" he asked. "Nothing yet," Daniel said. "She's testing the line." "She's scared," Nora replied. "Those are not the same thing." Ethan stared at the phone again. "If I don't answer, she may disappear." Daniel pushed off the window and came closer, not near enough to crowd the screen but near enough to assert himself as the strategist in the room. "Ask where she is. Nothing else." Nora looked at him. "And if she lies? Then we learn that too." Ethan typed carefully. "Home. Where are you?" The typing indicator appeared almost immediately. Vanished. Returned. Nora watched the three moving dots with irrational intensity. So much of modern catastrophe seemed to arrive like this now. Inside pauses engineered by other people's thumbs. Finally, a new message came through. "Parking lot behind Street Ann's school gym. Black SUV has circled twice. I think it's his security guy. Don't call." Nora took a step forward before she realized she had moved. Daniel's face changed in a way she had not seen before tonight. Not guilt or calculation, but a quick, involuntary flash of fear. "Victor doesn't have security," Ethan said. "Not official. He has drivers and consultants and ex-cops he pays cash to," Daniel replied. "Same difference." Nora's mind was already moving. Street. Ann's was 15 minutes away in good weather, 12 at this hour. Catholic school campus, mostly empty at night except for a custodian or the occasional gym lights if some booster club rented the floor. Safe enough to hide near. Exposed enough to trap someone in a parking lot. "We're going," she said. Daniel turned. "No. That was not a discussion opener. You don't know what you're driving into. Neither do you, which is why sitting here is the dumbest version of control you've proposed yet." Ethan was halfway to standing. "I'll go." Both parents answered at once. "No." The word cracked through the office. Ethan froze. Nora saw the humiliation hit him, then settle into anger. "I'm the one she texted." "Because you're the least threatening Whitaker at the moment," Nora said. "That is not the same as protected." Daniel rubbed a hand across his jaw. "If Victor has people watching her, the last thing we need is a family convoy pulling into a school parking lot after midnight." "Then she comes here," Ethan said. Nora shook her head. "Not if she thinks this house still belongs to you." She regretted the phrasing as soon as it landed, not because it was false, but because Ethan heard the marital shrapnel inside it and looked away. Daniel took a breath. "I can send someone I trust." Nora almost laughed. "Do you hear yourself? Which exact trustworthy person, from your orbit of donors, consultants, and men who owe Victor favors, would you like to dispatch to the woman you slept with while he recorded your son?" Daniel's nostrils flared. "I am trying to reduce variables." "You are a variable." Ethan's phone buzzed again. A photo this time. Ava had sent an image through a rain-specked windshield. The blurry rear corner of a black SUV sat under a busted parking lot lamp, angled across two spaces. No plate visible. Just enough to prove presence. Beneath it, another text. "He knows I took something. If I move, they follow." Nora's stomach tightened. "What did she take?" Ethan asked. Daniel's answer was too quiet. "Probably copies." Nora turned on him. "Of what?" He did not respond quickly. That told her more than words. "Daniel." He held her gaze for a beat, then said, "Possibly recordings. A trust memo. Maybe donor routing. I don't know what she found." Ethan stared. "Trust memo?" Nora's pulse climbed. "What trust memo?" Daniel looked past them both. To the bookshelves, to the old photos, anywhere but directly at the consequences wearing his last name. "My father amended the Whitaker family trust 6 months before he died. The adjacent Eastgate parcels were moved into a side vehicle under an LLC structure for tax reasons. Victor knew before I did because he helped facilitate land valuation back then." Nora went cold. "You told me the trust holdings were static. They were supposed to be." "That is not an answer. Because I didn't understand the scope until probate review." Ethan frowned. "Wait, are you saying Grandpa basically handed you a piece of Eastgate?" Daniel's mouth tightened. "Indirectly. It's complicated." Nora closed her eyes for 1 second. There it was again. That national anthem of the compromised. "No," she said, opening them. "It is profitable. That is different. Ethan's expression shifted from panic to a different horror, one braided with recognition. That's why Victor wanted Dad in, he said. It wasn't just zoning. Dad's family cashes out if the redevelopment goes through, Daniel snapped. It is not that simple. Then stop saying that when it gets simpler by the second, Nora said. The room felt overfull now, as if all the hidden architecture beneath their lives had finally risen into visible shape, and there was not enough air left once it did. Ethan looked back at his phone. She said he knows she took something. If we don't move, she may dump it somewhere else. Nora held out her hand. Give me the phone. Ethan passed it over. She typed carefully. Stay in the car. Lights off if you can. We're sending someone in 10. New message beneath it came fast enough to feel like a grab of the wrist. Not him. Nora stared at the words. Not him. No ambiguity. New pretense. Daniel saw them over her shoulder and flinched like the truth had acquired fingernails. Fine, he said. Then Ethan goes. No, Nora said again. Then who? He was almost shouting now, volume cracking the varnish off his restraint. You? Nora's answer surprised even herself by how steady it felt. Yes. Ethan straightened. Absolutely not. You think I can't drive to a school parking lot? I think if this turns into something ugly. It already is. She handed him back the phone. Text her that I'm coming alone. Daniel shook his head. I'm not letting you do that. You are not in charge of what I risk to clean up what you hid. He stepped between her and the desk. Not touching, but blocking by habit. Nora, listen to me. If Victor is spooked enough to put eyes on her, then this is beyond marital revenge and family panic. This is legal exposure and money. Men get stupid around both. Men got stupid long before tonight. Don't reduce this to a line. Don't reduce it to a memo. Ethan made a sharp sound of frustration. Stop. Both of you. Jesus Christ. The rawness in his voice cut through them. He looked suddenly exhausted, older and younger at once. Some false coating burned off by the hour. Mom can't go alone. Dad can't go because Ava won't get in the car. I can go with Mom. Nora opened her mouth to refuse, but Ethan kept going, words tumbling faster now that he had begun. No argument. Victor already knows I'm in this, so there's no magical clean version left. But he's less likely to do something stupid if I'm seen with her and Mom instead of just her disappearing. And, if she has recordings about me, I need to know what they are before some lawyer does. Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Then at Nora. She could see him calculating risks, optics, liability, the geometry of exposure. It enraged her that calculation still had utility. It enraged her more that he might not be wrong about some of it. I come too, he said. Ava's earlier text seemed to flash again in Nora's mind. Don't answer if he's there. Not him. No, Nora said. You stay here. Daniel laughed once, but there was nothing amused in it. You really think that's tenable? I think it may be the first useful thing you do tonight. Ethan took his phone and typed before either parent could resume. Mom and I are coming. 10 minutes. Stay put. Don't get out unless you see us. The reply came after a pause. Hurry. Nora saw Daniel reading over Ethan's shoulder and knew he was deciding whether to override all of them, whether power at home still functioned now that power outside it had begun to crack. Maybe he saw the same thing she did, that if he insisted on coming, Ava might run, or worse, panic publicly. Maybe he also saw, with some final sinking recognition, that trust had drained from the room so thoroughly no command of his would land cleanly. He stepped back at last. Take my car, he said. Why? Nora asked. Because it has darker glass and better tracking if something goes sideways. By you? By me, he said. And before you say it, yes. I understand why that sounds bad. I don't care. Take the car. Ethan was already reaching for the office door. Nora stayed where she was. If we bring her here, you leave, Daniel stared. This is still my house. Then we go somewhere else. A long beat passed. Then, with visible effort, he nodded once. Fine. The concession felt less like victory than structural collapse. Ethan left to grab his keys and shoes. Nora moved at last, stripping the green gown from her body in the upstairs bedroom with none of the tenderness usually required by formal clothes. She pulled on jeans, a dark sweater, flats. In the bathroom mirror, her face looked both sharpened and blurred, cheekbones more severe. Mascara smudged faintly at the corners. Hair loosened from its pins into something almost feral. She washed her face quickly, not to soothe herself but to remove the ballroom from her skin. When she came back downstairs, Daniel was in the foyer, holding out the key fob to his black SUV. He also held a slim envelope. What's that? She asked. Cash. She almost refused on principle. then took it because principal did not buy gas, motels, or silence at the right front desk. Their fingers brushed. It felt like touching a memory of marriage rather than the thing itself. If she has the trust memo, Daniel said, voice low, there may be names on it you don't recognize. A shell company called Harrowland Holdings. That traces back to my father's vehicle, not directly to me. Nora slipped the envelope into her bag. Not directly seems to be the family motto. He accepted the hit. Good. If she shows you a donor spreadsheet, he added, look for routed contributions through church PACs and preservation committees. Victor Launder's influence through civic language. Ethan came down the stairs 2 at a time, now in a hoodie and jacket, hair combed back with wet fingers. He looked like he was going to a bad college party, not into the center of a scandal that could rearrange his future. Nora hated the normalcy of the costume. Daniel tossed him the keys. Ethan caught them automatically. The competence of the motion made Nora's chest tighten with an absurd maternal thought. He was still her son even in this. Still the boy who used to snag fly balls in the yard without breaking stride. Outside, the air had turned cold after the rain. The brick walk shone under porch light. Crickets had resumed somewhere in the hedges, unconcerned with collapse. Ethan drove. Nora sat in the passenger seat and watched the city slide by through dark-tinted glass. Neighborhood streets first, then broader roads where traffic lights blinked yellow at empty intersections. Raleigh after midnight held a different class system than by day. The office towers downtown became reflective husks. Fast food windows glowed for people who still had to work. Construction cranes stood over sleeping blocks like unfinished threats. Ethan kept both hands tight on the wheel. Did Lila call? He asked suddenly. Nora glanced at him. Not yet. He nodded once. She's going to hate me. She may be angry with all of us for a long time. That's not a no. Nora looked back out the window. He deserved no easy answer. Still, she heard the child in the question and said, hate is usually simpler than what families actually feel. Ethan made a sound that might have been agreement. Or dread. At a red light, he spoke again. Do you think Dad's going to be arrested? The question startled her not because it was impossible, but because Ethan still imagined consequence as something that visited fathers from the outside, rather than growing from what they'd built. I think powerful men often mistake delay for innocence, she said. That's not what I asked. No, it isn't. The light changed. He drove on. I keep replaying the thing I said to Alvarez, he murmured after a block. The momentum line. At the time, it felt like a sentence Victor would respect. Like the kind of language men use when they know how the world works. Now it just sounds cruel, Nora offered. Ethan's jaw tightened. Cheap. She considered that. Yes, she said. Also that. They turned into the school access road with headlights dimmed. Street. Ann's rose ahead in pale brick and locked glass. The gymnasium squatting off to one side behind a chain-link service fence. The parking lot was mostly empty. A single busted lamp pulsed weakly near the back row, throwing intermittent light across wet asphalt. Nora saw Ava's sedan first, parked crooked near the far edge, dark except for the faint glow of a dashboard. 20 yards beyond it, angled under shadow, sat the black SUV from the photo. Engine off, no lights, too still. Ethan slowed. You see anyone? He whispered, absurdly, as if men in parked cars could not hear tires. Nora scanned mirrors, fence line, gym doors, the patch of trees beyond the lot. No. Pull past her and stop so your passenger side faces her driver side. Ethan did it neatly, more controlled under stress than she would have guessed. Before the vehicle fully stopped, Ava's door opened. She stepped out fast, clutching a canvas tote to her chest. No coat. Hair pulled back badly, as if tied by feel instead of mirror. She crossed the narrow gap between cars and yanked open Nora's door with one hand while glancing over her shoulder at the dark SUV. Up close, she looked nothing like the woman in black silk at the fundraiser. Her makeup was gone. Her mouth was pale with cold and adrenaline. Move, she said. Nora got out and around to the back as Ava slid into the passenger seat. Ethan hit the locks. The black SUV remained still for one more terrible second. Then its headlights snapped on. Go, Ava said. Ethan did not need telling twice. Tires hissed on wet pavement as they shot toward the exit. In the side mirror, Nora saw the black SUV lurch forward behind them, deliberate now, no longer hiding. Ava twisted in her seat, breathing hard, one hand braced on the dash, the other crushing the canvas bag against her ribs. He knows, she said, voice ragged. He definitely knows. Nora gripped the back of Ethan's seat and looked at the white knuckles on her son's hands, the pale curve of Ava's cheek, the twin headlights swelling in pursuit behind them, and understood with a clean, terrible certainty that whatever remained of the Whitakers after tonight, would not be decided by love or dignity or the old polished stories they had told themselves about service and family. It would be decided by who they were willing to expose and how fast they learned to survive the truth in motion. Motion. Ethan took the first corner too hard, and the tires skidded just enough to send a thin scream through the wet road before catching again. Nora braced one hand against the door and the other against the back of Ava's seat. Behind them, the black SUV swung wide, recovered, and stayed on them with unnerving patience, not racing to ram, not dropping back, just holding the exact distance of a warning. Streetlights flashed over the windshield in long amber bars. The wipers beat a steady metronome across a glass already drying from the ended rain. "Do not go home," Ava said, still twisted halfway around to watch the rear window. Her breath fogged faintly in the cold air coming from the vents. "If we go to your house, he'll know exactly where everything is." Ethan shot her a look. "Who's he?" "Victor. That's not who's driving." "No," Ava said. "That's Marty Levin. Used to work private security for a pharmaceutical distributor. Victor pays him to stand around looking semi-legal." Nora absorbed the sentence, the specificity of it, the weary certainty. "How do you know?" Ava laughed once without humor. "Because he's been opening doors and closing conversations around Victor for 3 years. Ethan gripped the wheel tighter. "You said he knows you took something. He doesn't know exactly what. But he knows enough to chase us?" Nora asked. Ava nodded, eyes still on the mirror. In the intermittent dashboard light, her face looked stripped to essentials. Fear had a way of removing style. "I copied files from Victor's office server 2 weeks ago when he started using me as an informal courier between campaign messaging and land acquisition calls. At first I told myself I was just keeping insurance because your husband kept lying to me." She glanced once at Nora, then away. "Then I realized insurance had turned into evidence." Nora felt the sting of the phrase, not because it was novel, but because it was true from another mouth. "What evidence?" "Audio. Memos. Contribution routing. Notes on holdouts. One spreadsheet that cross-references properties, council votes, and donor pledges." Ethan swore under his breath. The SUV behind them kept its distance through a yellow light. It could have pushed through harder. It chose not to. That restraint frightened Nora more than aggression would have. It suggested confidence. "Where is it?" she asked. Ava tightened her grip on the canvas tote. "2 places. That's not specific enough. One drive is in the bag. One isn't with me." "Where?" Ava's jaw flexed. "With a lawyer." Daniel's prediction about contact and copies slid through Nora's mind. She felt no relief. A lawyer meant leverage, and leverage meant sequence, and sequence meant the night had already progressed beyond family containment. "What lawyer?" Ethan asked. "Not one your father knows." "That answer sucks," he snapped. Ava looked at him then, really looked, and something like pity crossed her face again. "Your father knows too many." Nora leaned forward between the seats. "Did you go to the lawyer before or after tonight?" "Before. I left a sealed packet Monday with instructions if something happened to me or if Victor moved against Alvarez again." "Again?" Nora said sharply. Ava closed her eyes for half a second, opened them. There was an inspection threat through a code consultant. Not official city channels. Just enough pressure to suggest the shop could get buried in violations if he didn't play along. Ethan made a broken sound in his throat. Nora watched his profile, the shame spreading there in waves. Good. Part of her thought with a harshness that startled even her. Let the shame arrive before self-pity can claim the room. But another part, older and more maternal, recoiled at how young he suddenly looked under it. "Did Daniel know?" Nora asked. Ava was quiet. Too quiet. "Ava." "He knew pressure existed," she said at last. "He preferred not to know the mechanics." Nora sat back. There was the American ethics of respectable corruption in one sentence. Outsource the ugliness. Preserve the conscience. Invoice the outcome. She looked over Ethan's shoulder at the road. Downtown lights glimmered ahead through low clouds. "Take Peace Street west," she said. "Then loop toward the old warehouse district." Ethan obeyed without asking why. "Where are we going?" Ava asked. "Somewhere with cameras, late-night traffic, and enough public light that Marty Levin has to remember he was once employed by people who used paperwork." Ethan's phone vibrated in the console. "Daniel." Ethan glanced at Nora. She nodded once. He hit speaker. "Where are you?" Daniel asked immediately. His voice filled the cabin, clipped and low, trying for control, not finding much of it. "Got her," Ethan said. "We're moving." "Is someone following?" Nora answered. "Yes." A beat of silence. Then Daniel said, "Do not lead them somewhere isolated." "Thank you for the groundbreaking insight." Nora replied. Nora. He ignored the jab and kept going. There's a 24-hour federal building garage entrance off Salisbury, with cameras covering the street. Or the county sheriff's substation on Harrington. Ava shook her head violently. No police. Daniel heard the motion in her silence, or maybe her breathing. Ava? She said nothing. Nora watched the rearview mirror. The black SUV was still there, now half a block back, patient as debt. Why no police? Nora asked. Ava pressed her lips together. Because one of Victor's donation channels goes through a sheriff's civic fund. I don't know who's clean at this hour. Daniel swore softly over speaker. Ethan looked sick. How far up does this go? He asked. Ava laughed again, smaller this time. Farther than you'd like. Not as far as Victor pretends. Nora made a decision she knew would fracture something regardless of outcome. Daniel, listen carefully. I want the name of the lawyer you told me to find. The criminal one, with no donations from you or Victor. Daniel was silent long enough that she knew he was deciding whether surrendering that name cost him more than withholding it. She hated how visible the calculation had become. Marion Holt, he said finally. Independent counsel. Office on Blount. She won't be there now. Ava turned her head. Marion Holt? You know her? Nora asked. Only by reputation. Ava swallowed. She's real. Daniel's voice sharpened. If you go to her, you do not withhold anything. Not from her. Not one text, not one call log, not one drive. Nora closed her eyes briefly. There it was, the first truly useful thing he had said in an hour. Useful and ruinous. Because once Marion Holt entered, family would cease to be the primary unit of survival. Text me her home address, Nora said. I don't have it memorized. Then get it. She ended the call before he could reclaim authority through tone. Ethan exhaled shakily. You trust him on this? No, Nora said. I trust that self-preservation sometimes forces honesty. The SUV behind them sped up as Ethan merged onto a broader avenue. It closed the distance, headlights swelling in the rear view, until the cabin brightened with hard white glare. Ava twisted back around. He's going to try and scare us into stopping. He can try, Ethan muttered, but his hands betrayed him, tightening so hard the tendons stood out pale on the wheel. Nora put a hand briefly on his shoulder, not to soothe him, to anchor him. Steady, she said. No sudden moves. Let him be the idiot on camera if he wants. The city around them thickened. Warehouses turned breweries. Old brick buildings repurposed into places where rich people drank under Edison bulbs and called it urban renewal. Nora had smiled through openings in these neighborhoods, cut ribbons, held trays, stood beside Daniel while he praised growth. Now every renovated facade looked like a translation of the same sentence. Someone powerful wanted what somebody else could not keep. Ethan's phone lit again. A text from Daniel, this time with an address in 5 points. Marion Holt. Nora read it once, memorized the street, handed the phone back, take Glenwood North, then cut over. Ethan nodded. Ava turned fully forward now, tote still locked to her chest. If we go to a lawyer's house in the middle of the night, I hope she's the kind of woman who keeps a gun and bad boundaries. I suspect she keeps better boundaries than any of us, Nora said. The SUV surged again, closer now, then veered into the next lane and drew nearly even with them for 2 breathless seconds. Through the tinted side window, Nora caught the silhouette of a heavy male head, the brief flash of a hand on the wheel, then the vehicle fell back again. Display, not collision. Message, not mistake. Ethan breathed through his nose like a man trying not to bolt. I hate this, he said quietly. Good, Nora answered. It would worry me if you didn't. He gave her a quick wounded glance, then looked back at the road. She almost softened. Almost. But softness had been the family's way of postponing moral vocabulary until business had already named the terms. They turned off the main avenue and into older residential streets, where large houses sat back from the road behind bare-limbed trees and stone walls. Porch lights glowed here and there. Sleep held the neighborhood like a spell they were about to break. There, Ava said suddenly, pointing. Is that it? A brick colonial stood on the corner with a low lamp burning in the study window. Ethan slowed, then pulled to the curb 2 houses down. The black SUV cruised past once, too slowly, then kept going to the end of the block where it idled near a stop sign. Nora could see its brake lights staining the wet pavement red. Move, she said. All 3 doors opened at once. Cold night air hit them hard. Ethan came around to Ava's side. Nora was already halfway up the walk. Gravel crunched underfoot. The house's front windows reflected them back as distorted fugitives. A woman in dark clothes leading. A young man carrying shame like a second spine. Another woman clutching a tote that might detonate half a city's self-image. Nora rang the bell once. No answer. She rang again. Longer. Light shifted upstairs. A shadow crossed the landing. "Keep your eyes on the street," Nora said to Ethan without turning. He obeyed. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened 4 inches against a chain. Marion Holt looked out wearing gray sweatpants, a navy sweatshirt, and reading glasses low on her nose. She was in her 60s, silver hair braided over one shoulder, face unpainted and unsentimental. Her gaze moved over Nora, Ethan, Ava, then past them to the street. She took in the black SUV at the corner in one glance, and made a decision with the speed of someone accustomed to night, bringing work to her threshold. "Come in," she said, and shut the door long enough to slide the chain. They entered to the smell of coffee, paper, and old wood. The foyer was narrow, lined with framed trial sketches and black and white courthouse photographs. Marion locked the door, then pointed Ethan toward a side window. "Tell me if that vehicle parks." To Ava, she said, "You're the one with the bag?" Ava nodded. Marion extended her hand. "I'll hold it." Ava hesitated. Marion's expression did not change. "If you don't trust me, you should not be here." After one hard swallow, Ava surrendered the tote. Marion weighed it once in her hand like a butcher evaluating something wrapped. "Living room," she said. "Nobody touches anything until I say so." They moved into a room lined floor to ceiling with books and banker's boxes. A lamp burned beside a couch covered in folded blankets. An open legal pad sat on the coffee table next to half a cup of cold tea. The room did not feel domestic, so much as temporarily inhabited by a life that had made accommodations with emergency. Marion set the tote on the table, but did not open it yet. "Names," she said. Nora introduced them. When she said Daniel's name as context rather than presence, Marion's eyebrows lifted half a fraction. "He called?" she asked. "Texted your address," Nora replied. "That tells me 2 things, Marion said. 1, he's finally frightened. 2, this is worse than adultery." Ava closed her eyes briefly. "By a mile." Marion looked at her. "You first, then." Ava stood, rather than sit. She seemed unable to relax any joint without surrendering all of them. "Victor Sloan used my consulting firm 2 years ago on a transportation bond narrative. Afterward, I found discrepancies in subcontract billing tied to outreach vendors that did not exist. I pushed. My boss took a settlement. Victor approached me privately last fall and suggested I'd have a better career if I stopped keeping copies of things I wasn't paid to understand." Marion nodded once. "Blackmail adjacent." "Yes." "And then? He inserted me into Daniel's campaign under a clean contract while keeping me on his unofficial side for message coordination around Eastgate." Nora watched Ava speak and saw how much discipline it cost her to Daniel. Keep Daniel's name level, not personal. She wondered if love had ever really lived there, or whether need, secrecy, and flattery had simply borrowed its furniture. Marion gestured for her to continue. "I started recording calls when I realized donor timing, zoning language, and acquisition pressure were being coordinated," Ava said. "Then Daniel and I." She faltered for the first time. Marion spared her nothing. "Had an affair." Ava's shoulders stiffened. "Yes." Marion wrote something on the pad. "That may matter emotionally. It matters legally only if it affected decisions, access, or coercion." "Did it?" Ava looked at Nora before answering. Nora held her gaze, and neither offered mercy nor demanded it. "It gave me access," Ava said quietly, "and it made it easier for Victor to assume I'd stay confused." Marion nodded again. "That's closer to useful." Ethan stood at the window, watching the SUV. Nora sat finally, because her knees had begun to tremble with exhaustion. Marion turned to him. "You're the son." Ethan almost laughed at the simplicity of the sentence. "Yeah. Did you threaten a property owner?" Ethan's throat worked. "I implied the city would get impatient." Marion's pen did not pause. "In writing?" "Texts." "Good. Better a stupid text than a polished memory." Ethan stared. "How is that better?" "Because stupid texts preserve exact stupidity. Polished men survive in ambiguity." Her gaze shifted to Nora. "And you?" Nora looked at the lawyer's face, at the room built for consequence, and felt the last illusion of this being a salvageable domestic crisis evaporate. "I found recordings in my husband's office tonight. Duplicated some. Heard enough to know my son is exposed, this woman is afraid, and my husband has likely mistaken moral distance for legal distance for longer than God intended." Marion's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "That sounds like a wife speaking, not a witness. At the moment I'm both." "Fine," Marion said. She reached for the tote and unzipped it. Inside were 2 external drives, a paper folder, a cheap burner phone, and a yellow envelope. Marian opened the folder first. Her eyes moved quickly over the top page, then slower. Then she looked up at Ava. "Did you read all of this?" "Most of it." Marian tapped the page. Harrow Land Holdings Beneficial Transfer Memo. Reverend-led PAC routing list. Preliminary commitments tied to rezoning sequence. Jesus. She looked at Nora. "Your father-in-law's ghost has expensive handwriting." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. There, in paper form, was the thing Daniel had half confessed. Family money braided to public process through civic camouflage. Wealth laundering itself as urban progress. Ethan stepped away from the window. "What happens now?" Marian set the folder down. "Now I decide whether I am a defense lawyer, receiving panicked clients, or a reporting conduit about to trigger a cascade." She looked at each of them in turn. "And you decide whether you came here to save a family, a career, a woman, a son, or the truth, because you are not going to save all five." Silence followed. Outside, a car door shut. Ethan looked sharply through the sliver in the curtains. The SUV parked. Marian stood. "Then choose quickly." Nora felt the question strike every fracture in her at once. Family, career, woman, son, truth. American life taught people to pretend those categories only conflicted in extreme cases. But she knew better now. They conflicted every day. Most people just lacked evidence. She thought of Lila on the hotel lobby marble, asking not to be protected from what she could already see. She thought of Ethan in Alvarez's shop, speaking in the borrowed language of powerful men. She thought of Daniel in the corridor, still asking for privacy after he had converted intimacy into infrastructure. She thought of Ava in the ballroom, sad instead of smug, already drowning before Nora had learned why. And she thought of Miguel Alvarez, who had not entered their house or their marriage or their campaign, yet had been made to bear the weight of all three. "My son," she said first, because the word came from the body before the mind. Then she stopped. Marian waited. Nora forced herself to continue. "But not at the cost of burying the rest. If Ethan is protected by a lie, he'll become his father in better shoes." Ethan stared at her, stricken. Daniel would have hated the sentence. "Good. So no burying," Nora said. "No private cleanup that leaves Alvarez exposed and Victor standing. If Ethan needs counsel, he gets counsel. If Daniel goes down, he goes down. If I lose my marriage in public, then apparently that's the smallest bill due." Marian held her gaze for a beat, then nodded once. "That's an answer." Ava sat down suddenly, as if the bones had gone out of her legs. Ethan looked wrecked, relieved, terrified, all at once. Marian picked up the burner phone. "I know a state investigator who hates being used by county men with donor friends. I know a federal prosecutor who owes me 2 returned calls and 1 insult. I know how to preserve chain of custody before daylight makes cowards of everyone. But once I start, this house becomes the first domino, not the hiding place." Nora heard the SUV door outside shut again. Heavier this time, closer to the walk. She knew Daniel was elsewhere in the city, waiting for an outcome he could no longer script. She knew Lila would wake into a different last name than the one she had gone to sleep with. Not in spelling, but in meaning. She knew Ethan would never again be allowed the luxury of not understanding what his charm could cost. None of it felt like justice. Justice was too clean a word for family debris, but it felt, finally, like direction. "Start," Nora said. Marian Holt reached for the folder, the drives, and her phone in one practiced motion, and outside on the front walk the doorbell rang with the hard, impatient press of a man who still believed access could be commanded if he applied enough pressure soon enough.